Go ahead, don't be scared. Come on in. It's all right. Find a seat. It'll be okay. Can everybody hear me all right? Good? All right. I'll let everybody kind of get seated here, and we'll go ahead and get started. All right. Good evening, everyone. I'm Jordan Ungles, and I have the great honor of moderating this symposium this evening. First, our committee would like to thank everyone who took the time out of their busy evening to gain a greater understanding of hyperscale data centers, what they are not, and what effects they have on the surrounding areas of their location. We're all well aware that any discussion of industrial-level advanced technology, whether it be hyperscale data centers, industrial solar, or BESS systems, can be emotionally charged. However, this evening is not about who is right or wrong. It is truly to gain as much knowledge as we possibly can for all parties involved. Our guests tonight will be speaking for roughly an hour. They will then have a 30-minute question and answer following that. All questions were submitted in advance to keep things running smoothly. Now, due to time constraints, if you are an elected official or the head of an activist group and you would like more information for your community at the end of the question and answer, please speak with our committee representatives, which are up here, stage left. In the front of the room, to get scheduled for office hours with the ladies over the next 2 days. Spaces are filling up quickly, but they will be available and they will try to accommodate as many as possible. They will not be available immediately after for discussions or questions. Several months ago, when it was first brought to our attention that Sedgwick County had 12 proposed sites for hyperscale data centers, our committee immediately began to do as much research and homework as we possibly could. We've made up a ton of ground and we've learned a tremendous amount. The difficult part of trying to gain a level of knowledge and understanding in such a gate-kept industry is that the only experts that seem to be around when these advanced technology centers are being discussed are those who are going to directly financially benefit from them. As a rule, we find it difficult to take an individual or company's word as an unbiased expert when the approval of said hyperscale facility is going to directly financially benefit that individual or company. So to find a true unbiased expert, we simply went straight to the source that our decision makers at the highest level of the federal government call in for expert testimony. Our guests this evening are Ms. Tammy K. Clark and Ms. Kristen Meghan Kelly. They are the pinnacle when it comes to expert level understanding of these hyperscale data centers. They have given expert testimony before federal legislative bodies. They've submitted written briefs to the United States Supreme Court and the World Health Organization. They've also been on countless news outlets and prominent podcasts. Ms. Tammy Clark, she's a highly credentialed health, safety, and compliance professional with over 20 years in the field of industrial hygiene and occupational and environmental health and safety. Tammy's a court-approved subject matter expert in environmental health, occupational health and safety, and regulatory compliance, and holds numerous government credentials through OSHA, the EPA, and the DOT. She's worked in many industries from manufacturing, food services, construction, and commercial agriculture to hospital systems and government agencies, dividing her time between teaching, training, and compliance consultant services. Tammy gained global recognition as a federal whistleblower whose testimony in the U.S. Supreme Court case against the Biden administration and OSHA exposed and stopped the administration and agency's overreach and abuse of power to create a permanent COVID-19 standard and mandate on all U.S. businesses and employees. Since her testimony in that case, she's also been instrumental in helping to expose and stop the continued violations of statutory authority by government agencies. Her work in the industry and in the courtroom has helped to restore the system of checks and balances and power back to the citizens of the United States of America. Tammy is now focusing her efforts on protecting human and environmental health with her expertise and experience in the fields of industrial hygiene and environmental health and safety. Ms. Kristen Meghan Kelly is an exposure scientist and industrial hygienist with 24 years of experience in occupational and environmental toxicology, specializing in human exposure pathways and real-world risk assessments. She served 9 years on active duty in the United States Air Force in bioenvironmental engineering and later worked with the VA healthcare system as both an industrial hygienist and radiation and laser safety officer. Known for calling out what others won't, Kristen focuses on the human and environmental risk of large-scale industrial expansion, including the rapid siting of AI data centers and utility-scale solar developments. She educates policymakers and communities on overlooked impacts such as chronic tonal noise, EMF, ELF exposure, PM 2.5 and diesel emissions, water usage, and long-term land degradation, especially for vulnerable populations. Kristen has also been a leading voice against improper one-size-fits-all public health mandates, advocating for informed consent and individualized risk assessment. She has provided expert testimony in litigation and legislative settings, exposing regulatory failures and patterns of agency capture. Known as the loudmouth liberty enforcer, Kristen continues to challenge the industry and government narratives, committed to one mission, telling the truth about human and environmental risks, no matter how convenient it is. So, needless to say, we are incredibly blessed to be able to have these women here this evening to help us gain a greater level of understanding for what it is that our elected officials, many of whom are in the audience tonight, are debating bringing into our communities. It is our hope that with the expert knowledge they gain tonight, they can make the most informed decision possible for the communities that elected them. Without further ado, ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming Ms. Tammy Clark and Ms. Kristen Kelly to the stage.
Thank you for that great introduction. Wow, now the pressure's on to perform, right? Hello, Kansas. It's great to be with you guys. This is my first time, our first time in Wichita. We have been all over the country helping to provide factual information on the science, the technicalities, and the legalities surrounding some of these data centers that are being proposed, many of them without any transparency behind the scenes. So that's why we're here tonight, just to give you facts. This is not a political discussion for us. It doesn't have anything to do with politics. It has to do with informed consent and transparency that you all as citizens deserve. So my background, I don't even need to explain it to you, but I want to talk with you a little bit about working in the fields of environmental health and occupational and environmental health. They go hand in hand because they are public health professions. And so my focus tonight is going to be talking to you about water systems, cooling systems, aquifers, what types of systems are out there, the challenges that are being presented, what are the outcomes and the effects of different systems on our aquifers or not, depending on what the data center companies choose to use, what type of systems they choose to use, and why. What are the options out there, and what are you being told, and how do you know what the best decision for your community would be? So that's a little bit about my focus, and mainly I want to really start from the perspective, for both of us, we are not anti-AI, we are not anti-technology, we are not anti-progress. Okay, that's not why we are speaking as experts on these issues. We are not here to try to slow growth or progress. It is our perspective that the way this is being done is irresponsible because it is going to create very serious negative human and environmental impacts. So that's where we're coming from. If we're going to do this, we're going to build data centers. We've had them around for 20 years or so, and we're going to talk about the difference between those types of data centers and the types of data centers that are being proposed here. If we're going to build data centers, solar farms, battery energy storage systems, whatever it might be, we need to do it properly. We need to follow the laws that exist and not just ignore them and sweep them under the rug. So that's really where I'm coming from tonight, and Kristen is as well. But I'll let her introduce herself a little bit, and she'll let you know what she's going to focus on tonight as well.
Yeah, and if you notice, we just kind of toss it back and forth. This is how we kind of jive. So our backgrounds and credentials were already explained, but I kind of want to for a moment explain what our fields are. So if you are in an occupational setting, what we do, there's a joke that you don't know what we do until something goes wrong. And we are exposure scientists. Just like doctors treat, we protect. We work hand in hand on a multidisciplinary team under the umbrella of total worker health, which is under public health. So we look at everything and how it impacts the human body, and also what we're doing in an occupational setting, and then how does that potentially bleed into your community. And we look at that from different routes and pathways of exposures. Inhalation, ingestion, contact, noise, illumination, ergonomics, radiation. So sometimes things are harmful if you inhale it, but it's not harmful if you ingest it. So knowing routes of entry and pathways, we'll dive into that specific to data centers. But when you understand that background of data centers, what are data centers? I'm sure some of you already know what basically we're talking about hyperscale data centers. And they are huge, large industrial facilities. They're not little commercial facilities. They're large and they're used to compute and store a lot of items that are online, including AI, cloud storage, and it computes a lot of new technology. So like Tammy said, we're not against it. It's just when we are looking at new growth technology, as you can see, these are being pushed all over the country. But in our profession, we always have to pause because a lot of times in our profession, things are rushed. I can tell you, in my career, I've seen construction go up and they totally missed the mark. I'll give you a short little story. A dental clinic at a VA hospital, brand new dental clinic. And we had cancer clusters. And they were making like crowns and dentures, and they use something called methacrylate. Now that's carcinogenic, meaning it causes cancer. And when they designed it, they never conferred with an industrial hygienist. So I went in and I built a design to put an enclosed hood so they were sticking their hands in, building the different models of dentistry tools and, like I said, the dentures and crowns. But it was now lifting it through ventilation out of the breathing zone. Previously, they had a hood like in your kitchen. So it was pulling it right up through the employee's breathing zone. That's the mistakes that happen during design when you do not confer with a multidisciplinary team. What we find in this professional life is people forget us, and we all have to respect ourselves and know the limitations of our own lanes. So Tammy, if you want to go ahead and cover the biggest issue that we've been talking about with the water.
Water, yeah, this is a problem because the water, we are experiencing cyclical droughts, recurrent droughts, and the problem is here in Kansas, you guys are sitting on an aquifer that is right now very strained. The aqueous beds, I think that's how you pronounce it, aqueous beds, and Wichita draws most of its water from this aquifer that's already very strained. What they don't get from this aquifer, they're getting from the Cheney Reservoir. And the problem with when Kristen and I drove around, and we actually did a little tour of your county, loved it. We're clearing our throats and sneezing and coughing, like what in the world is happening here in Kansas in our hair? Like the wind here. Oh my gosh, we had to go get it done today just for you all. But you know, we had a really good time exploring the county, and it's just beautiful. The waving wheat, we're not used to seeing that. It's just beautiful. And then we were shown, here's where this one is proposed. Here's where this one would be proposed. And the first thing that stood out to me, even before that, was the transmission lines. That was the first hazard to me. I thought, oh my gosh, look at these transmission lines. Miles and miles of them. This is already a problem for people or animals nearby around those transmission lines because, and Kristen's going to talk to you a little bit about this, the EMF, the radiation, the noise, the vibration, that's already a problem. Then we noticed massive, huge electrical campuses that are being built, and they're going to be expanding some of these grids, right? So we thought, oh my gosh, these substations, the transformers, the relays here, and they're going to be expanding them. That alone is a problem. And, you know, so we thought, okay, we're having all of these, really this concurrent cumulative exposure issue, and now we're going to put a data center, hyperscale data center here, and one here, and one here, all along these transmission lines, as we were told, really all the way to Montana maybe. We were like, what? Y'all are not going to be able to live here. Do you understand the human and environmental impacts of that? Well, you're going to when we're finished tonight. But we were very concerned because we're talking about water usage. Now, don't let anybody fool you. Okay? We're going to talk about the EMF, the ELF, all of that. But I want to talk to you about the water usage that I'm very concerned about because of the drought situation right now and the massive amounts of water that these hyperscale campuses use. And you don't just have one going up here. You don't just have one proposed. You've got multiple. And they're going to be pocketing your communities in. So basically your communities will be pocketed around these hyperscale data centers, kind of squeezing you in with them all around. And we're going to explain the dangers of that nobody is talking about. In fact, I don't really think they know. Nobody has conferred with us. And if they have, and they do know, I don't think they care. Because they're making so much money. These are billion-dollar corporations. And there's a race for this. And this is all to do with the AI bubble that personally I believe is going to pop here pretty soon. And we're going to get into all that as well. But the problem that I'm seeing, number one, is that your community, your aquifers, this state cannot possibly sustain the water demand. Do you realize these hyperscale data centers will draw up to 5 million gallons a day? That's just one. There are proposed multiple data centers all around here. I'm telling you right now, your aquifers cannot sustain that. Well, that's okay, because then they tell you, don't worry, we're not going to use water. We're going to use a closed loop system. Don't let anybody fool you. There's no such thing as a closed loop system when water is involved. Even if they say we're going to use a glycol-cooled system. Well, let me tell you, glycol is 50% water solution. So it's still picking up water, and water is still being lost. Okay, so we might not be drawing 5 million gallons, but maybe we'll draw 1. Think about that. Then there's an alternative cooling system where they say, and this is what I've heard that some of you are being told, we're going to use air cooling. Well, how hot does it get here in Kansas in the summer? I mean, we were sitting outside of our hotel today and I think we got a sunburn in 10 minutes. It is hot here. It gets really hot here. You can't use hot air to cool hot components. It doesn't work. In addition, you don't use air cooling on massive hyperscale systems. That is for the small microsystems, the standalone systems like what we already have that have been in place and designed to provide support to an existing system like a hospital, an educational facility, corporations. They have their own data centers to support their own operations. Okay, that's a very small system when you're compared to what we're talking about here. So there are alternative cooling systems that we can talk about that are very effective, but none of these companies here want to use them. Why would you think that would be? One word. Money. That's exactly right. These alternative cooling systems are very, very expensive to install initially and to maintain. Now it's true, they don't use water. They do use alternative cooling liquids, engineered synthetic liquids, things like mineral oil, dielectrics. Okay, but they don't want to do that because they're very, very expensive. And so if they don't have to, if they can just come to Kansas and tap into your aquifers, great. If you let them, here's the problem. If you are allowing them to do that, trust me, they will do that. They're already doing that in areas where they're being allowed to get away with it. So you all have to understand the dangers associated with that, especially as local officials. How many local officials do we have in the room? Would you raise your hand for me so I know who I'm talking to? Great. Thank you so much for coming. Because one thing you need to understand, who is the government in the United States? We, the people. And the more local the issue is, the more power we, the people, actually have. So the local officials who are here, and I appreciate you being here to learn and to get the information, the actual scientific, technical, and legal regulatory information, take it back to your local townships, your counties, your communities that you represent, and do a great job there representing the people with the facts. Okay, that's really, really important. Because if you don't listen to your constituents and you put your communities at harm, well, you probably might be looking at getting fired. Just saying. I've been involved in a lot of recalls because of these types of situations. Nobody wants to go there. But the only reason people go there is because their elected representatives have stopped representing their voices. So then they have to be recalled. Right? Now that's not a threat. I'm just saying that's what we're dealing with all over the country today. So it is very important that the local elected officials look at what's going on in our communities, apply the facts and the information and say, is this going to be good for my community? Can my community afford this? And what are the repercussions? What's the fallout? We're going to talk about that even 10 years from now. What's it going to look like to live here? So I just wanted to go over a little bit about the water issues. And then I'll get into that a little bit more, but I'm going to let Kristen get into her side of things because she talks a little bit more. When we talk about human health issues, we also talk about environmental issues and how they marry because our profession is a public health profession. So she's going to talk a little bit from her perspective about what she's going to cover.
Yeah, so when we are doing hazardous risk assessments, kind of like a doctor triages which patients to treat first in an emergency with limited staff. For me, looking at data centers, working in the military, I worked at a large electrical utility company. To me, The first hazard, the greatest hazard, is something called tonal energy that causes tonal noise. Now I have a question for you in the audience. How many of you, if you're retired, if you've ever or now, wear hearing protection in the form of earplugs or muffs in the workplace? All right, so then you've heard the term hazardous noise, and you probably have heard of OSHA. So those controls are in place. There's something in our profession, you have to picture an upside down pyramid. It's called the hierarchy of safety and controls. It's existed since the 1950s. It's not new science. So we go to the top and we say, eliminate and substitute, can you do that? Then you have engineering controls. Remember that, that's the most important. Then, if the engineering controls do not reduce the hazard enough, so if you have hazardous noise, you kind of put it in a barrier to lower the sound, like on a piece of equipment you're using or a room. And then there's administrative controls, training on being aware. And then PPE is a last resort. That's your hearing protection. Now, when you think of hazardous noise, it's something that you hear. It's auditory. Anything over 85, the measurement for noise is unwanted sound, are decibels. So when I say dB, that is what I'm talking about. So when we are measuring noise that you hear, the unwanted sound, we measure that in something called dBA. What I see, and what's very infuriating, is I've sat through so many presentations from these companies putting the data centers or solar farms. They don't know I'm in the audience, and they try to tell and gaslight the audience and say, it's only 55 dBA at the fence line. Okay, what about the other measurements? So there's frequency in sound. Think of music. You know, I have a daughter in college, and when I'm in her car, my chest beats because she's got the bass going. That's tonal noise. I'm like, turn it down. So treble is more of like the auditory dBA, and the bass, you feel it. So just because you can't hear noise doesn't mean it doesn't have biological impacts. Tonal sound is no joke when it is continuous 24 hours a day. What it is a low hum, a droning sound, like a very low constant sound. It's repetitive. And what I want to really hone in is that when we assess hazards in an occupational setting, all of the science associated with exposure data to these types of materials, because remember, we're taking industrial hazards and now putting them in residential communities. So we're no longer talking about an 8-hour workday. This is 24/7. So that should be alarming to you. Not to like overhype this, but it's new. We're not used to doing this. So tonal noise that is 24/7. You have to think, if you're going to measure tonal noise, I've seen people download apps on their phone and try to be like, oh, it's not hazardous. Yes, it is. To measure tonal noise, you have to use something called an octave band analysis. Think of listening to music and you hear different tones, sounds of different what's the word I'm looking for? Not frequencies. The key of sorry. I'm not a musician, but we measured a measurement called dBc and dBz. So think for a moment that we're outside and you're trying to tell me that the sun is not bright and you have your Ray-Bans on. If you take off those sunglasses, you're going to squint. Because that's when you measure in dBA and just dBc, you are filtering out the tonal noise and you are not representing. Think for a moment, if you've ever had a torn tendon or ligament, imagine your doctor, who you know you have to get an MRI for those diagnostics of those types of injuries, tells you, go get an x-ray to see if you have a torn ligament. You're not going to find it. Does that make sense? You have to make sure you cannot find what you're not looking for if you're not using the right measurements, calculations, and equipment. So there are calculations I won't bore you with, but please know when we are measuring tonal noise, it's not just what you hear, it's what you feel. So what does tonal noise do? Well, first of all, the most vulnerable populations are children, expectant mothers, the elderly, the chronically ill, and neurodivergent or autistic children. And why is that? Are you aware that tonal noise has been used throughout history as a military torture technique? It has. Tonal noise causes a biological impact. It causes an increased stress response on the body. It elevates cortisol levels. It can increase, especially for expectant mothers, maternal fetal heart rate. So the mother and the baby, or the fetus, you want to be technical, it increases that heart rate, and it can cause low birth weights, put stress on the mother that can put her in early labor. One vulnerable group I left out is actually livestock and horses and animals. Very reminiscent and important to this community. For children and adults, it can affect your mental health. It can cause restlessness, confusion, reading comprehension. If you've ever had like brain freeze or people who have ADHD, they kind of have that paralysis and they can't form the thoughts. That's what it does because it's sending your brain into flight or fight mode. Tonal noise can also disrupt the endocrine system. And what it does to the elderly who are more sensitive is it can exacerbate existing issues. If you have a pacemaker or you have circulatory issues in your body, because tonal noise is also vibratory. Now with the livestock, farmers, ranchers, your cattle will have lower dairy production. The quality of meat is going to go down because it also disrupts their mating cycles. It lowers their libido. They don't have that desire to have mating cycles repeated. They have been known to cause self-harm. They bang their heads on fences. They're so irritable, and animals are so much more sensitive. If you are somebody who does have animals or cattle, or you're on a farm or ranch, you know that your animals and your livestock can kind of feel when the weather changes. They know when a tornado's coming. They know when the barometric changes. This is very sensitive to them. So this is disrupting your whole economy of what you're doing on your farms. Everything I just told you is already a red flag during an 8-hour work period. Again, we're talking 24/7, no work rest cycles that are implemented. And what I want to point out is that people are telling us that when we build these data centers, we'll just put continuous noise monitoring using dBA. That should be insulting. So if they're going to do this, you have to request continuous monitoring, acoustic monitoring. And there's a profession called an acoustician. One other thing is called bioacoustics, or acoustic ecology. So it can impact your wheat that you grow. It impacts plants. It impacts the food you're growing. I'm not an alarmist. I'm telling you what tonal noise does and why it has to be engineered out. So the people in these data centers that are working there, I know they tell you they're going to bring jobs, but afterwards in the construction, there's like a handful of people that actually work there. In their offices, they have implemented engineering controls to make sure that inside the offices, they're not feeling the same effects that you are. So for those of you that are dealing with hazardous noise in your workplace, you know that you're legally required to be protected by the Occupational Safety Health Administration. Who's protecting you when you go home? That's the question you need to be asking your public health officials. So if I am going to triage the biggest hazard, it is that tonal noise, and it is also the hardest to control. And there are technologies, I'm not just going to scare you, there are solutions. And that is that when you're dealing with what is causing the tonal noise, is the EMF and the ELF, electromagnetic frequencies and extremely low frequencies. It's the electrical energy that causes vibration from the coolant, the fans, the transformers, all of that electrical equipment, and the constant computing creates that tonal noise. And they can put these computing towers on springs that help absorb it. They can put them on, think about if you're like going to drop like a cinder block on your mattress. You know how it absorbs it? You've seen it on the pillow ads. Now drop that on cement. Most of the time they're just putting it on a cement block. So they're cutting corners and they're not trying to do it safer. And that's why it's so important. During the design, you have to have, and I'm going to keep saying it, a multidisciplinary approach in review. It's so that all hands are on deck to make sure when we implement new technology, new commercial and industrial sized buildings, we have to make sure that we're protecting the public. So again, look into tonal noise. Everything that we're telling you, you guys can fact check us. Go look. There's studies. It's existed for decades. But what hasn't existed is studies on the 24/7 exposure, but I know what it is on an 8-hour workday, and I'm very uncomfortable.
So continuing on here with the human impacts, I want to talk to you a little bit about your water discharge. So what happens with these data centers with the water that they're using? Okay, so like I said to you, there's really no such thing as a closed loop system if any water is involved at all. And the problem is the water that's circulating through these systems, it picks up anti-scaling agents, anti-corrosives, biocides, and then it is also evaporating at the same time. So what happens is the operators will frequently discharge that water that's carrying all of that sludge basically, and that's called blowdown. So the problem is, what happens to that water? It's supposed to be clean when they discharge into your drainage system, wastewater treatment facility, or whatever. But from what we have seen, it's not being cleaned. From what we have seen, there are a lot of regulatory requirements that are simply not being followed at all with a lot of these data centers, including the very initial environmental impact studies that are supposed to be done with a new commercial style or industrial style facility before it's even built. They have to do an environmental impact study on anything of this nature. That's a legal requirement, both federal and state. So for you at the county levels or at the city, the townships, the little local villages, however your local communities are organized, one of the things you need to be doing before you will allow any permitting or anything to move forward is you need to ask them for an environmental impact study and the aquifer study that's supposed to be done. Now, they're probably not going to give that to you because they're not doing them. This is what we've seen. And we've exposed a lot of projects, and actually a lot of projects have been called off and they've walked away because they knew they couldn't pass the environmental impact study or the aquifer study. But that's really, really important because all of you, your drinking water, your wells, the city of Wichita, your wells are coming from, your water's coming from this same source. And if that water's getting blown down and not cleaned, what is making its way down into those aquifer recharge areas, into the aquifers themselves, the rivers, the lake beds, right? It just makes its way back down into your aquifer, and these communities are set on wells. And you're just drawing that up through your well water. It does have an impact. Don't let anybody tell you it doesn't. So many, I tell people all the time, and Kristen does too, people should not be drinking unfiltered well water in America today. Because, I mean, we know in farming communities, we have a lot of pesticides, fertilizers, right? We have high levels of nitrates in our soils and things like that. So we really shouldn't be drinking unfiltered water anyway, but this is going to be an additional hazard that's very significant. In addition, if it is discharged into a wastewater treatment facility, I can tell you that these wastewater treatment facilities do not have the capability of filtering out these types of chemicals. They're great at filtering out biologics, but they're not great at filtering out certain chemicals like anti-corrosives and biocides. They don't even have the filtering media for that. So then where does that water go? Right into your tap. Right? So these are real issues. These are very real environmental concerns from the operational systems that negatively affect human and environmental health that we in our profession have to call out. If we did not call this out and we did not expose the way this is being done, the irresponsible and unsafe manner in which this is being done, we would not be abiding by the ethics of our profession. So I just wanted to go over the water system with you, and then I'll throw it back to Kristen to talk about generators, PM 2.5, and all those fun scientific terms.
Yeah, I was going to circle back for a moment because I was remembering when we were doing our tour and we were talking about the wind. Well, it was in a hair commercial. Specific to your community, I thought, duh, I know this. I just don't live in this type of climate where, you have so much winds across your state with the flat plain. Tonal noise. I need. This is where if you're going to take notes, this is, I think, very important. Tonal noise can get carried further because people ask me, Kristen, what's a safe setback? And I can never give an answer because it is so site specific. It's specific to your communities, what is nearby, because tonal noise pings off cement, your structures of your homes, your siding. So the more things that you have around data centers, it pings off. I jokingly with children, I say, think of Sonic the Hedgehog. You've seen that, he charges up and he can run. Tonal noise comes out of the facility and it hits a house and it pings and it keeps pinging. And guess what exacerbated? Wind. Wind can actually carry, because wind can bend sound. It can carry that tonal noise even way further than you previously thought. And then you have nighttime inversion. So at night, when the DBA, the traffic, the talking, people mowing their lawn, that DBA sound is now lower. So then you have dominant tonal noise. And the inversion is at night. It's cooler on the ground and the heat rises. That temperature inversion makes the tonal noise more prevalent. It's not just annoying. Don't let anyone tell you that tonal noise is just annoying. Your heart rate being elevated and having health impacts from this isn't annoying. It's a biological impact. So I just wanted to add that. So another human health impact is from the diesel generators. Now they generate not only tonal noise, but hazardous noise, but with space that can be lessened, the hazardous noise. But depending on how many generators are needed, they're very large. And I always tell people, if you're going to try to find out who's actually trying to put in a data center near you, the first thing you want to do is look at whatever you guys have in your state where they request diesel air generator permits. Because you're required through environmental regulations to do called tier reporting to make sure that you're not releasing something called PM 2.5 above thresholds. PM 2.5 stands for particulate matter that is equal to or less than 2.5 microns. And that is basically 30 times smaller than the width of a human hair. So when you inhale PM 2.5 emissions, it goes deep into the lungs, and the hazardous materials that are inhaled from diesel generators that can be tested weekly or monthly. Now, think about we've seen facilities have 48 generators. This can exacerbate people that have asthma, COPD, and it has something called volatile organic compounds, dioxins, and those again are carcinogenic. And they have long-term cancer risks when you have chronic exposure over time. It doesn't mean that it's going to happen to you, but let's think about how often are they testing this, how far is the wind taking it, and are you downwind? This is why nothing is one size fits all. So the diesel generators do contribute to environmental emissions that are regulated by the EPA. A lot of industries have PM 2.5 emissions that they're allowed so often, but here's the thing. When you're in an industrial area, not everyone can release their PM 2.5 emissions at the same time. So now think about that if we have multiple data centers in the same saturated area.
Yeah, and this, for this type of a community, looking at, the way we were looking at where certain proposed facilities are being proposed, it's going to lead to that cumulative exposure impact. So especially when you're looking at agriculture areas like this, it leads to an environmental deposition concern. And there's dry deposition that happens just through gravity and source contact. These PM 2.5 particulates, what Kristen was just referring to, are going to be magnified and exacerbated because of the amount in close proximity. When we looked at where these data centers are being proposed, they're in too close proximity for the size that they are, for sure, especially close proximity to your schools and your farms and your livestock. But what happens is we have dry deposition, and that just happens from these particulates that fall from gravity, and then you have source contact contaminating your farms and your land, and then you have wet deposition that happens from rain, fog, snow. But the problem is the overall cumulative concern is that these hazards will affect your soil, they will contaminate your soils, they will affect your crops. You will have poor soil quality because it's contaminated. You will have lower photosynthesis rates, which is going to lead to smaller crops. You will have crops that are not as healthy because they're not picking up the minerals they should be picking up because the minerals are being replaced by a lot of toxins in the air from this discharge. And all of that leads to poor quality of crops. It leads to livestock that are eating contaminated crops. It leads to contaminated beef that we're eating, pork, chicken, whatever it might be. It leads to contaminated milk. So this is a real problem. When you take these massive industrial scale facilities and you plop them down in the middle of an agriculture community. This is such an environmental hazard for so many reasons. And it's also then that leads directly to a human health hazard. And so this is why we wanted to provide you with some of these terms and the facts of what the processes lead to. This is the direct result of these systems, operations, and processes.
And when we're talking about not just the tonal noise or the ELF and the EMF exposure from the data centers, when you have them trying to connect, that's why they're coming here. I'll just tell you what we've heard straight from these companies is that they seek out farmland with struggling farmers and ranchers, and they look for weak zoning laws or people who don't have their master plans that match their zoning rules. And elected officials are under a lot of pressure because they're worried about saying no to the data centers and looking discriminatory. Because if this other industry wants to come in, you said yes, why can't we do this? Well, the environmental impact is completely different. You can't just have a biological lab here and have Amazon here. They don't have the same impact. Does that make sense? What a lot of people ask us, and I'm not an economist, but I'm sure a lot of you are wondering, it is true that it will raise your energy rates. And while your government, or your community, not your government, your community energy companies might say, hey, we need to lower, don't have your air conditioning at 65 degrees. You can only water your property on even days. I take that as a challenge. Because the selective enforcement of those utilities is very maddening, and it has to do with a lot of donations to your politicians. And I'm not saying that to be negative, it's very true. We've seen it, and you've heard of NDAs around the country that are occurring. Your energy costs will go up, because as more and more hyperscale data centers are coming in, they have to upgrade the existing systems, the substations. And these substations are like those giant electrical areas that are they're very protected under FERC laws. You can't go into them. You have to have credentials to get in there. They have to build more of those, and they want to connect in. You have this infrastructure that they want to connect into, but they need to build off of that. So then, cumulative, right now, they are emitting tonal noise in ELF and EMF, but at such a low level that it's not harming you like a data center would. So something can be not necessarily as hazardous here. When you have multiple exposures that target the same organs and body systems, that's a synergistic impact on the body. So yes, you foot the bill and your energy costs are risen. I know this from seeing around the country, and we sat on a panel in Virginia. It was awesome. They showcased a multidisciplinary panel. We had an economist and a geologist, and the economist broke down the whole issue of the energy bills, and it also dispelled the sale that they tell you about all the revenue that's going to come in and the ROI that is very short term. So I'm going to give you a name of somebody that you should look up online named Nathan Price. Nathan Price is an economist and a friend of ours who is tackling the monetary issues surrounding this.
So you're being told that there will be a lot of revenues. And so what we're hearing from county commissioners and legislators all over the country is the same thing. They feel pressured because they don't want to miss this bandwagon. We can't miss out on this. Everybody's doing it, right? And so we have to bring this to our community too, because we don't want to miss the opportunity. And so when we dig into this a little bit and we say, well, what opportunities do you think you're getting? Well, the tax revenues, the tax base, the tax revenues, and the jobs it's going to create. That's just false. It's not going to generate additional revenues for your city or your county, because what will happen is what is happening all over this country already, where there are existing known data centers and property values have just plummeted to the point that people have walked away from their homes because they can no longer sleep in their homes because of that tonal noise and the vibration that Kristen was talking about. People can't sleep, and so they're awake all night. They have the insomnia rates go through the roof. They're moving into their basements just so they can sleep. Well, at some point, you just think, we can't live like this. The light pollution, we didn't even get into that. If you have as many data centers as what they want to put in around here, this whole county will be lit up like New York City all night long. I promise. You'll get up in the middle of the night, because we've seen it. We've seen the areas where this has already happened. You will get up in the middle of the night, you won't need a nightlight on. You can walk around in your home, it'll be perfectly bright. Couple that with the noise and the vibration and the light pollution. Your quality of life, your health begins to tank because you can't sleep. So families end up moving into their basements, trying to just buffer out the noise and the light. Finally, they decide they have to leave, and they can't sell their homes because who wants to live near a data center? Nobody's going to move in there. Your property values are going to decrease. No new people are moving in. People are fleeing the area to get away from it. So the whole tax revenue, tax generation thing, it's just not a thing. All right, and in addition, it's the only jobs that they create are the initial construction jobs. All right, and after that, they're pretty self-operating, like Kristen said. You may have a handful of people, but these computer systems are operating themselves. You may just have to have a handful of people in there, to manage a few things. But what's the point of AI? To replace human beings. So don't let them fool you with this. So everything we've just told you, all these very serious, and by the way, many of them permanent and irreversible, human and environmental issues, you're betting on that for what they're promising you in return. The ROI does not make sense for the complete disastrous fallout that allowing this, and imagine what the footprint of this over 10 years is going to look like. What's this county going to look like after 10 years of this? It will completely change the culture. It will completely change the environment, your quality of life, your way of life. I mean, we've seen it. We've seen the churches as we drive around and we just see all the beautiful wheat fields. And then we see the tall steeples. Oh, there's that church over there and there's that church over there. And everyone just kind of knows everyone. We all know each other. It's community. That will be gone.
People say hi here.
Yeah, we love it. And y'all are so friendly. Y'all know each other and you're so friendly. You've been so good to us. But at the same time, you really need to think about the repercussions of this because that will all be gone. And this is not our opinion. It's our expert, credentialed knowledge and experience. Experience is the key word here. So it's very, very important when you understand what you're trading off, the risk-reward analysis needs to be done. You need to look at what are the risks, what are the rewards. I mean, it's going to be like, right? It's a very dangerous and irresponsible manner in which we're approaching this right now. And we really need you all to have this information because it is heartbreaking to us to see this happening in the heartland of America. I mean, it's just heartbreaking. And once these beautiful wheat fields go, we were just talking about this driving here. Kristen says, I don't really think people realize when they buy a loaf of bread, what all goes into that? It's right here. This is where it comes from. That all goes away. And the heartland of America feeds America. Actually feeds the world. So what are we doing? What is the rush? There is no reason for this. And we want to cover this aspect as well, and we'll jump back into our notes here while I'm thinking about this. The rush is not an organic demand for computational outputs. It's not. We do not need the number of data centers, especially these hyperscale data centers, just blasted blanketed all over the entire country for AI. We really don't need that. We don't need it right now, and we're not going to need it in the future because future technologies already exist that are way different. Way different. And in a few years, these data centers are going to be moving to outer space. That technology is already being developed, and it's already being implemented. They're going to be built underground where they can be geothermal cooled, under the ocean beds. So by the time the massive campus gets built here, and your lives have been disrupted, by the infrastructure disruption because of the massive construction project that's going to affect everything. Everybody's roads. Dust you guys are used to dust because I saw it today. But dust like you haven't seen yet, right? And then massive amounts of trucks and construction equipment and vehicles and noise and light for years. These campuses take years to build. Then when that's done, and then the company says, oh, you know what? That better technology is here because this is coming within 3 to 5 years. They're going to abandon that campus, and then what are you all left with? You will not have the ability financially to decommission that facility. And from what we have seen, nobody is putting it into the requirements up front. Nobody is saying, if you come here, we need you to check all these boxes, including decommissioning. And they'll tell you, because we've heard this, oh, we have that. We already planned that. We're going to decommission. No, they're not. Their attorneys say, no, we're not. And we've seen it. So what happens then? You are left with such a massive campus that the county or the township does not have the money to completely decommission and remediate that land that has been so contaminated that now it cannot be turned back into agricultural farmland. And then what? The character and the culture of your communities, your way of life has been completely disrupted, people have been harmed, livestock have been injured and harmed, and you have no way to go back to what it is today. Y'all really need to think about that. Because in our professions, we do everything proactively. We have to look at things, we have to assess things. What we do as industrial hygienists is called anticipate, recognize, evaluate, and then we engineer and we control. So looking at all of this with the known hazards that we already know are there, associated with all of these processes, then we have to anticipate and recognize what is the fallout. Well, we don't have to really use our brains a whole lot, because all we have to do is get online somewhere and see the videos of people living next to data centers. They'll tell you exactly what's coming. What we're telling you is going to happen, they're already experiencing. All right, so that's why we always want to stay in a proactive position, because we're in a position of control right now. We can say, no, not here. But once they start digging and it's too late, there's no going back. Then you're in a reactive position, and your property values are going to plummet, and you're going to have to make one of two decisions. We either stay here and live with this, or we sell for what we can and we move. And then where are you going to go? Right? So these are the things that are on our hearts heavily as we drive around and we see what's going on, and people are being lied to, or people are being gaslit. They're being laughed at, scoffed at. Well, I'm sorry, but we're here to tell you the facts.
Well, it's funny you say that. I can tell you that we have talked with elected officials, and we so appreciate their time. Because a lot of people think we're crazy, and why are you the only one saying it? Well, we have ethics, that's why. We also work for ourselves, so you can call our HR and you'll get us. But we are solution-based, so now that you feel defeated and hopeless, please don't. There are communities that have stopped this. They put pauses on things, moratoriums, referendums. There are administrative ways to stand up, and I tell people the fastest, quickest, most legally binding thing you can do at the lowest level, the township levels, the county and state levels, you have noise ordinances. Your neighbor can't blast Metallica at 1 a.m. But your noise ordinances, I guarantee you, do not address low-frequency tonal noise. Because everyone thinks noise is what you hear. Remember, tonal noise you feel, and it's not just annoying. Having your cortisol levels raised, having cardiovascular issues isn't annoying. It's unjust. So get with us or other industrial hygienists in your community and have them look up how you can address tonal noise ordinances in your community, and they will not be able to come in. And again, we are not against data centers, we're not against AI, but there are smaller footprint technologies out there. There's better ways to do it, and there's engineering controls that they can put in these facilities that very much lower the tonal noise. Lowering the emissions is very difficult, but you can encapsulate the diesel generators and put filters, but it's too expensive. And that burden should not be on you. So update your noise ordinances to reflect tonal noise. Put in there, we need acoustic monitoring. We need constant low frequency monitoring, doing C and Z, DBC and DBZ monitoring. And this isn't over technical, I want to explain to you. If I'm going out with my meter and I check DBA, let's just say it's 55. But then I flip it on to DBC and it's 80. That's called a C over A calculation. And if it's greater than 15 to 20 decibels, meaning that the low frequency, the DBC, is more dominant by 15 to 20, you have dominant tonal noise, and that's a red flag to not do full octoband analysis, including the unfiltered Z. Think complete naked. You're getting all frequencies of the sound to get that true cumulative exposure data. Because the cumulative impact analysis is what is going to stop these, because there's better ways to do it. They're trying to do it quick. It's a competition. This isn't like the Beanie Baby craze. They just want to get it done. And if they don't fulfill these contracts, there's penalties. Again, not your problem. So we are solution-based. I do think that's the best thing you can do. Update the noise ordinances. Put in requirements. Talk to your state legislators to say, hey, you're going to bring in any sort of, it's not just data centers, except they're the main ones that do it, is that saying, you know, you guys have to fulfill this requirement, and this requirement, and this requirement. And because they don't want to pay for it, they'll move along. I don't know if you want to address the zoning issues more thoroughly, but this is not discriminatory. Some industries and some facilities, again, have greater human environmental impacts compared to DuPont, Amazon, an airport. But I guarantee you they all had to have environmental impact studies and show how they're going to control their discharge, how often they're going to report their PM 2.5 emissions. Even hospitals have to report emissions of their ethylene oxides emissions, sterilizing equipment. So these controls are in place, the science exists. I don't want anyone to tell you, if you're sitting in this audience and you don't believe us, that's fine, but I want to tell you, we don't profit off of this, we're here to help you. This is what God brought us here to do. God brought us together 6 years ago in a different fight. We are here to help you. We are here to educate you, empower you, to activate you, to administratively stand up for what's best for your community. And I am very pro-liberty, and I believe in property rights. But I live by the principle that you can do what you want. Don't harm another person or their property. But if you're allowing and you're someone leasing your land for this, I'm sorry if you're in financial hardship. The money's not what you think it is, but you're creating a greater hazard for the grandchildren, for the students, for the economy of the people who are farmers or ranchers. And you guys seem to have a strong community, you should have those conversations. So if you put those control measures up front and ask the questions, they might just get so annoyed that they just go to the next place. Or we might beat them there.
Oh, we will, we're everywhere. Yeah. Okay, so that's kind of how we want to wrap it up. For the local officials in the room, state legislators, anybody who is an elected representative who is sitting in the people's seat. The items that Kristen gave you, the checklist to require of them, is enough that they will say, we can't. They know they can't. Show us the environmental impact study, show us the aquifer study, and then monitor it. That have a requirement for constant monitoring, the tonal noise, all of that. And then put a requirement in there for constant monitoring and reporting. And then what's your decommissioning plan? Get it all in writing. Okay, so they don't want to deal with that. And what we have noticed is that when the people are educated and they stand up and they require what's actually legally required of them to be done and they enforce it, they will go somewhere else. They don't want to spend the money on alternative cooling systems because the aquifer system, the water study, obviously didn't pass. So then they're going to be forced to use alternative cooling systems, and that's so expensive that they'll just go to another community with loose zoning and uneducated people where they can just bulldoze right through there. That's what's happening. So we just wanted to provide you guys with the facts, the scientific, the legal, the health, the environmental facts, and then we're going to make ourselves available for some questions.
Thank you, guys.
Wow. Yes, ladies, that is fantastic job. Thank you so much for being here. So we are going to be going through some questions here. All these were sent in advance. There are some of the things, and we've discussed this, there are some of them that might sound a little redundant, but there was a couple of them that we wanted to make sure that all of you who are here really kind of understood the impact of things. So I'll just start right off the bat here, ladies. So what plans, if any, do data centers have to deal with the large fluctuations in power use that have alarmed the power grid managers?
My understanding is they don't have a plan. And depending on where you live in the country, I live in Michigan and we're connected through an agreement called MISO. And that's the one thing is however you guys are set up to share your power. So in Michigan, they're coming after us because they want to suck away our Great Lakes. But I would say we may, not me, but somebody may consent to it here, but it's going to disrupt the line over here in a completely different state. And Canada just might kick us out. So I don't think there's a plan because then they have to address an issue that's going to raise alarms.
Well, and I just want to elaborate on that because most people don't understand how it works. These facilities, because they generate so much heat, they require so much electricity. And one of the executive orders that President Trump signed was to require them to generate their own source of power. So this is why we're seeing this mad rush for gas-powered plants and We would love to see nuclear, but at the same time, who wants to live by a nuclear plant and a data center? But it's one of those things, though, that the electricity that is generated, even though they generate it, it's still, they're telling you, oh, we're going to generate enough electricity, and then we're going to sell it back to the power companies. But most people don't really understand the downline, down-grid, regional grids, like that Kristen was referring to, that when they just tap into your local grid, electrical grid, number one, it can't handle it. It cannot possibly handle that kind of load. They're already stressed and outdated. Number two, downline, it's affecting our neighbors and our regional partnerships. And number three, the utility companies contractually get permission from your legislature to pass the costs on of the increased generation to the ratepayers in the local areas. We have seen in Michigan our electric rates skyrocket like over 150%. And this is happening everywhere. So you got to be really careful about this particular conversation. Don't let them snow you, because what they do is a clever game of wordsmithing. And if you're not educated on how all of this works, you go, oh, okay, you wouldn't know.
Yeah, and there is better technology that is more efficient and has a way smaller footprint, like lower nuclear energy, way smaller footprint than a huge nuclear facility. I had someone approach me about that in Texas. So obviously I'm not an expert on that, but my understanding is there's a lot of technology out there and people are waiting to be heard, again, for more efficiency and way smaller footprint with way less human and environmental impacts.
Excellent. This next one, you've kind of touched on, but we'll hit it again just to kind of reiterate. How will data centers impact us as we age and our children and grandchildren as they grow up and start their own families?
Yeah, I did address that, but I really need you to hear me. Tonal noise, again, 24/7. And in an occupational setting, we implement those work rest cycles. When you leave work, you're not around the hazardous noise, you're not inhaling the chemicals. I mean, you should be in a respirator, have engineering controls, but my point is your occupational exposures are usually limited by 8 hours, unless you're doing, overtime to 12. You're taking the industrial hyperscale exposures that are regulated, and you're putting it into a residential community with no global or universal safeguards. So your stress will increase. Again, cardiovascular risk. And when I talked about neurodivergent children, autistic children or children on the spectrum, they're more hypersensitive and they get overstimulated to vibration, noise, and different frequencies. That is unfortunate because those individuals have a harder time. So you're going to have irritability, behavioral changes in children and adults, but the insomnia causes a myriad of other health issues. And although I'm not a doctor, my background is toxicology, and my job is to study the human and environmental impacts from industrial operations. And I do train doctors on what happens in a workplace so that we can make sure we make exemptions for people who have an illness, or if you're expectant, you're definitely not going to work around chemicals that can be absorbed into the breast milk. So it's a team, multidisciplinary approach.
Yeah, so those are the effects of tonal noise. Nothing to blow off here. I'm sure most of you are like, I had no idea. Most people don't. But I also want to talk to you about the human and environmental impacts of light pollution. It's like living in Alaska where it's light all the time. That's only for a season. This will be permanent. When your circadian rhythms are disrupted, your sleep cycles are disrupted, insomnia goes on day after day after day, that seriously and negatively impacts your health. As you age, what it's going to do is cause inflammation in the brain, and it's going to cause your cortisol to spike. Well, as we age, our cortisol already naturally spikes because of hormone fluctuations. So a lot of people have insomnia as they get a little bit older. So magnify this. This is what we talked about, the cumulative exposure. And then let's talk about the dissipation or deposition rates. The dissipation rates of the PM2.5s falling out of the air and depositing into your soils, contaminating your soils and our food source. Then throw in that chemical and toxic exposure. And some of these things are dioxins, which are forever chemicals, generational chemicals.
What we didn't even touch on is when dioxins dissipate from rain into groundwater or soil, even though you think it's settled, there's something called soil vapor erosion. How many of you heard about East Palestine, Ohio's train derailment? Well, we were there right after it happened and found out that they were absolutely ignoring all the hazards. It was an uncontrolled control burn. It was mishandled. We were part of a lawsuit against the Fed and state EPA. I'm not even exaggerating when I tell you They purposely used improper sampling equipment to give the illusion that they were looking at the data. It was a massive cover-up. It's now all encapsulated in giant lawsuits, but yeah, we're still dealing with that. Men have breast cancer, women have breast cancer, ovarian cancer, and children are harmed.
Yeah, and we called that out. We said, oh my gosh, when we watched the EPA, how they were testing the air, the soil, the water, how they were even decontaminating, we actually pulled out our phones and we're like, we gotta videotape this. And we have all the footage, which is why we were the two named expert witnesses in that court case, because what they were doing was actually creating a greater hazard, and they were re-aerosolizing it into the air. We were walking around for 10 minutes and our tongues were going numb. 2 weeks after this had happened, and we thought, this should not still be in the air, what's going on? But my point is, you don't get what you don't sample for. You don't get what you don't test for. So to bring this all the way back around to what Kristen was explaining to you about noise, when they're saying to you, oh, we're testing the noise, don't worry about it, we're monitoring. Yeah, but what are you monitoring for? Because you're not going to find tonal noise if you're not actually monitoring for that. And then it's real easy to gaslight people.
And just remember, just like in the medical community, there's different diagnostic testing to do diagnosis. You don't just do an x-ray to find out if your testosterone is low. And again, you don't do a CT scan to find endometriosis. There are specific diagnostic tools to find specific ailments and injuries.
To kind of piggyback off of that, what is in your expert experience, what is a reasonable setback distance from a data center to a residential area, and why?
Unfortunately, that is a question nobody can answer, and if they try to tell you, they're being dishonest, because it depends on so many factors. You guys having your geography, you guys have very flat land. That's exacerbating the total noise. Also your wind, and then depending on the soil. How many buildings are around it? What's it made of? Is the tonal noise going to bounce? When we were in Virginia, we had a geophysicist there that looked up the aquifers and wells, and due to the bedrock? She was like, the shale. Yeah, Virginia has the most data centers because they already had, because that's where the internet started, AOL, so they have all the technology kind of set up, and it is draining the wells. Absolutely draining the wells. These people have to put like jugs of water in the backs of their toilets. Their water flow, their showers, they can't, I mean, it sounds minimal, but they can't wash their hair because there's not enough. I've ever been to a hotel that has no water pressure. That's a real issue for a lot of operations happening in your home. So it just depends on your soil, your environment, the temperature, what is around it, how big. Every data scale is using different types of fans. There's fans that are high-powered, low-powered. The high-powered ones are going to be more tonal noise, the low-powered ones. So it's not one-size-fits-all, and that's exactly why it's site-specific, and you need individual risk assessments and that environmental impact study done.
Excellent. So have either of you been able to read or had access to the recent Berkeley white papers that was submitted to our county commissioners? And if so, do you have an opinion or an analysis on it?
Yeah, we met with some commissioners the other day, and that was brought up, so I asked to see it. And I was able to skim over it, and I did appreciate the fact that it seemed to be not for or against. It was very neutral, and I think they did a good job. They actually addressed tonal noise, but the problem is they were claiming things to be speculative. Well, it's not speculative to know what tonal noise does to the human body, and they're looking at data more on a lower scale. And they're not looking at cumulative impact if there's multiple data centers in a very concentrated area. So their intent was well, but they did not get site-specific, and they left off true exposure data. It's a white paper, so it's not a study. I'm not going to completely ruin it, but it's not a thorough analysis that you guys need. And I didn't like how they tried to undersell the risk.
So we've had existing data centers for decades. I'm curious why these concerns may have not been brought up. That seems to be an argument by those who take no issue with these hyperscale facilities. Can you give a little bit more of an explanation on the difference of when they say, oh, well, I've got a data center in my office building right now?
Yeah, well, and that's kind of like I said in the beginning, we have had data centers around for about 20 years. But these are very small economy scale facilities with not that many racks, small servers, and they were designed and built to feed a system, like a hospital system, or a company like a Google, warehouse type facility, or wherever we're going with that, right? They've grown, they've gotten larger, the needs have gotten more, and so we've had more and more data centers built around the country, but nothing to this scale. Nothing to this scale. This is new, these hyperscale data centers that everybody's all excited about because they're being really sold a bill of goods that's not true. This is a whole different animal. And the previous data centers that existed, they didn't draw the 5 million gallons of water a day. They didn't create the emissions, the types of emissions that we're talking about, the noise. They were much smaller scale. So we didn't really feel the effects any more than we would from another maybe manufacturing facility or, something like that. I mean, you guys have Boeing here, right? Like, you may not even notice the difference between that and a factory or a plant. But what we are doing right now, this whole new thing with these hyperscale data centers are going to create hazards, and they are creating hazards, and we now know because they've been documented on a completely different level of human and environmental impact.
So, in your expert experience, should any industrial advanced technology, meaning data centers, industrial solar, battery energy storage systems or BESS, be placed over a surface-charged aqueous bed aquifer that provides water for 500,000 Sedgwick County residents and is responsible for 60% of the city of Wichita's total water usage?
Yeah, I mean, I think I addressed that already, and that's why I looked into your aquifers, I looked into your drought cycles here, and I looked into what they were proposing. And then I realized that your aquifer is already stressed, and it provides that amount of water to the communities and to the town of Wichita. And now we're proposing multiple sites. That's very, very concerning. I would never recommend that. In fact, I will be honest with you, your aquifer can't sustain that. If we go ahead with what they're proposing and what they're wanting to do, you are going to have water pressure issues. You are going to have a problem watering your crops. You are not going to have the agricultural water supply that you need because you are going to experience exactly what they're experiencing in Texas and in other parts of the country where now the local governments are telling them, don't run your water from these hours to these hours, and when you take a shower, turn your water off, shove up your hair and then rinse. I mean, it is crazy what's going on. People are turning on their faucets and they just have this trickling brown little trickle coming out of their faucets. The water issues are, besides the siting, the location, the water issues are probably my secondary concern.
I agree.
So to stay with that, with these claimed health and environmental issues that you two have just brought up, why are we not hearing from our own state and county health officials about these things?
We'd like to know the same thing.
Well, we learned this through the pandemic because, again, we are exposure scientists. We are the experts in exposure controls. We're the ones trained to control pandemics on a multidisciplinary team, and they had never dealt with that before, and they've never dealt with this before. So they haven't dealt with public health as a community. They haven't dealt with you guys dealing with the hazards that are associated with taking a hyperscale data center and putting it into your communities, which, by the way, I know you know this when you've traveled, like you're a warmer climate, but if you have someone from a very cold climate, North Dakota, trying to live here, they're not acclimatized to the weather, just like you're not acclimatized to hearing a bunch of tonal noise or even a lot of excessive hazardous noise for those of you that live in the rural communities. So they aren't aware, and a lot of community public health departments don't even have industrial hygienists on staff, but we fall under public health, so I'm just as confused as you are, but you should be bringing these concerns to them because they have a duty to protect you.
So last one here, ladies, kind of just to close. Where do you see the future of these data centers? Where do you see things going, I guess?
Well, I already touched on it, outer space. But there are technologies that have already been developed that can power, and we just talked to somebody, a gentleman here earlier approached us and said, hey, have you heard of this? And we're like, we have actually, because people have reached out to us as we've traveled and have talked with us about some of the new technologies that exist. They actually have technologies that can power a city, power one of these hyperscale data centers in a small size. The data centers that will be going to the moon are not going to look like the hyperscale facilities that are built here on terra firma. They're much smaller. And that is already being developed. It's already being put into play, in practice, if you will. But those technologies are developing so quickly. This is why we've heard from talk to anybody in the cyber tech world or the tech world, they will tell you this AI bubble is going to burst. So we need to slow our roll, because if we don't get this right and we rush headlong into it, we'll be 2 years into construction, we'll just open up the hyperscale data center, and then they're going to abandon the whole thing because the newer technologies are way better and way cheaper to operate, and they don't have to deal with the cooling systems, the mechanical systems, and dealing with everybody else. And then you're going to be left with an abandoned campus and nothing to do with it. So this is where we're going with data centers.
Ladies, thank you very much. Go ahead.
I actually have one request, but I'm going to need unanimous consent of the room, and if you don't consent, if you could put your head down. But I have a 22-year-old daughter and a 10-year-old daughter, and I missed her ukulele solo in her spring concert to be here to help you guys. And I know it would just make her feel so amazing if we could do a little video just saying, "Good job, Ellis," with an E. Is everyone okay doing that? This is not going to go on the internet. This is going to her little phone. So it would mean a lot to me. You guys are willing to do that for me? Okay. So on 1, 2, 3, just say, Good job, Ellis. Hold on, I'm going to zoom out because there's so many of you. Okay. 1, 2, 3.
Good job, Ellis.
Thank you, guys.
Excellent. One other quick note that we want to make a point of here. If what you heard tonight spoke to you, if what you heard tonight has created a little bit more of a drive for you to say something or to have something said, there's some very important dates that are coming up. This Thursday, May 14th, at the Advanced Learning Library, that's at 711 West 2nd Street in Wichita. That is the South Central Kansas House and Senate Legislators Town Hall. Now, at that town hall, you can discuss any issue that you would like. Something that we would suggest bringing up, if you are so inclined, we strongly encourage folks to speak on the repeal of Senate Bill 98. Now, Senate Bill 98 was a 2025 bill that gave a 20-year, 100% state and local sales tax exemption to these data center companies. So that includes land, buildings, equipment, engineering, and labor. So kind of like the ladies were talking about in regards to the ROI, this magical ROI that they talk about that never seems to show up. Your legislatures have already invited them in by saying, hey, 100% tax-free. Now, that can be repealed though. So if you are so inclined, this Thursday, doors open at 5:15. The meeting starts at 6 p.m. Now, you do have to sign up to speak, and you're only going to have 2 minutes. So work on your speech. All right? Get dialed in on that. But that will be very important. May 14th at 711 West 2nd Street, Wichita. We'd love to see as many of you there as we possibly could. Once again, ladies, thank you so much.
I just want to add one more thing. Please review all of your shirts. I have a shirt idea for you that will get conversations going other than just no data centers. Is putting something on a t-shirt that says, an absence of standards is not an absence of risk.
Ladies, phenomenal work. Thank you.